Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I'm going to go over the Codex of Power system for Diablo 4. Now this is a system that's been worked on for quite a while, but has only been recently revealed to the public through the most recent news and content creator beta, and now with the most recent developer livestream. And this system is going to tie heavily into gearing, and I think is also going to play a pretty massive role for every season of Diablo 4. So to understand the Codex of Power, you also have to understand how the legendary system works in Diablo 4. So in Diablo 4, legendaries are going to be the second highest rarity in the game. They're going to roll with 4 normal affixes, then 1 legendary affix that's also commonly called legendary power or a legendary aspect. So if I use any of those terms, it's talking about basically the same thing. And there are going to be hundreds of different legendaries that could be class specific or just general use that any class can use. And they are going to give pretty substantial buffs to certain aspects of that class if it's class specific or just your general power. And we actually do know of quite a lot of different legendary powers, and I'll be going over some of them later on in this video as well. Now, the main part of the legendary system that ties into the Codex of Power is that you are able to take any legendary power off of a legendary item. So once you get a legendary, you can take it to an occultist NPC and they will pull that legendary power off of that legendary item, which will destroy that legendary item and give you a legendary aspect, which is a one-time use item that you can put in either a rare or a legendary item. And if you put it in a rare item, turns that rare into a legendary. If you put it on a legendary item, it overwrites that legendary item's current legendary power. Now, with all of these legendary powers, or what are called legendary aspects, they're all in one of 5 categories. They're either offensive, defensive, resource, utility, or mobility. Now, for legendary items, all of these legendary powers can randomly roll on any item of that slot. So if it's an offensive power, it can go on gloves, one-handed or two-handed weapons, rings, and amulets. If it's a defensive power, it can go on helms, chests, pants, and amulets. If it's a resource legendary, it can go on helm, rings, or amulets. If it's a utility legendary, it can go on helm, chest, boots, gloves, and amulets. And if it's a mobility legendary, it can go on boots and amulets. Now, all legendary powers or aspects are in these different categories. That is also going to apply to the Codex of Power. So with all that information understood, that brings us to the Codex of Power. Now, the Codex of Power is essentially a way to permanently unlock specific legendary powers for your entire account by completing dungeons in the world of Diablo 4. Now, we know there's over 120 dungeons, and we know from the most recent developer livestream that there's 115 legendary aspects unlockable for the Codex of Power by completing different dungeons. And these powers will be specific to different dungeons. You'll be able to find out and go do that specific dungeon for the power you want. Like I mentioned, these will be account wide, so you could go on a barbarian and do every 150 dungeons that gives you a power, and all of your other characters would have those powers. Even if those powers are for a different class, that barbarian can still unlock it for the entirety of the account. And the legendary aspects in the Codex of Power can be put on any item just like any other legendary power you would obtain could be. So you can put them on rare or legendary items, but they still have to follow the rules of normal legendary powers. So if it's a class specific legendary, you're not going to be able to use it on other classes, and it's going to have to follow the 5 different categories we already went over, but you're able to just put it on any item you want. We don't know the actual cost of this because these are infinite use. Most likely they're just going to have a gold cost to apply them to a different item. Now, one of the big parts of the system is that every power in the Codex of Power is going to be the lowest rolled version of that legendary. So for every legendary power in Diablo 4, they have a range that they can roll in, kind of like normal affixes. So for instance, there's a legendary power that enemies afflicted with a damage over time effect deal some % less damage to you. Now, the base roll is 20%. We don't know the max roll, so let's say it's 20 to 50% on this roll. The power in the Codex of Power would always be a 20% roll. So even if you go get that legendary power in the Codex, you are still going to be able to get upgrades from finding that specific legendary power on an actual legendary item and trying to get the best roll that way. So the Codex of Power probably isn't going to be used into the super endgame of Diablo 4, but it's going to be used quite a bit on new characters. It's going to be used quite a bit on making new builds for those characters. It's going to be used quite a bit at the start of Diablo 4 on the permanent realms, and it's going to be used quite a bit for every new season. And even though you're unlocking codexes of power on the entirety of your account, I'm assuming this isn't going to count for the seasonal realms because the seasonal realms aren't really tied to the same thing. So most likely every new season, you'll have to unlock those codexes again if you want them. But this will also allow you on a new season to go target farm the specific legendary powers you want for your build and get lower rolled versions of them very early on in the season. And the developers did also mention that the Codex of Power will not house all legendary powers that can drop in the game. So there are 115 powers in the Codex, and there are going to be a lot more than 115 legendary powers in the entirety of the game. So there might even be some very good legendary powers you want for your build that you can't get in the Codex, that you just have to go get off of a legendary item. So this system is going to help you gear up much more quickly in the early and the mid game, and then once you get into the end game is when you'll be searching for those higher rolled legendary powers and searching for other legendary powers that aren't in the Codex. And this can also play into some other systems in the game. So first off, for hardcore players, I could definitely see this being something that is very much going to help them keep those characters alive for a lot longer, at least in the early and mid game, because specifically for hardcore players, having a tanky character is very important for a character that if they die once, they're just dead. So this will probably be used for hardcore players on new seasons, or even just new hardcore players in general, because you'll be able to target farm a really good legendary power that makes you much more tanky. Even the one we just went over could potentially be something really good for being much harder to kill. And the second thing is trade. Now I went over trade in a separate video, so I'd recommend checking that out if you want to learn fully about trade. But for trading in Diablo 4, you can't trade legendary items or their legendary aspects, but with the Codex of Power, you could just buy a well-rolled rare item from another player and then instantly put a legendary power out of your Codex on it and have a pretty well-rolled item while you go and farm for better rolled versions of that legendary power. So it's going to play into multiple different systems in the game, and I think this type of system is really good for giving people a much more deterministic way to gear up at more of a base level, but then also allows for a lot of potential farming and grinding to try to get your best versions of that legendary power. Now I did also want to go over the legendary aspects that were shown in the most recent developer livestream, and I'll also have a link in the description to Maxroll that has a much more extensive list of what legendary powers and aspects are going to be in Diablo 4. Now keep in mind, a lot of those don't have all of the role information, so the power I went over earlier in this video was actually from Maxroll. Now that power only has the base roll of 20%, but they don't know how high that roll can go, so not all the powers on there are going to have all the information, but if you want to check out what you can expect from legendary powers, that's a good place to do it. But the legendary powers that were shown off in the live stream, that also showed off the Codex of Power UI as well, starts as Aspect of Might, which is basic skills grant 25% damage reduction for 4 seconds, and this is unlocked by completing Dark Ravine in Dry Steppes. So like I mentioned, this is showing where you actually have to go and get these because this power has not yet been unlocked, so you know where you have to go to find the dungeon that you need to complete to unlock these legendary aspects. The next was Aspect of Disobedience. You gain 0.25% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 25%, and this is unlocked by completing Halls of the Damned in Khagistan. Then we have Prodigy's Aspect. Casting an ultimate skill restores 80 mana, and this is unlocked by completing Witchwater in Hawazar. Then we have Aspect of the Changeling's Depth. Werebear skills restore 1 spirit when you hit enemies affected by your poisons. When when spirit is restored, your poison effects are removed from the enemy. Now this one is undiscovered in Kazakhstan. Now I'm not sure if this means certain ones you have to go discover the location. Is there some way to discover the actual locations of these Codex of Power? Or do you have to actually discover the dungeon itself, more specifically just the dungeon entrance? Then the Codex of Power will be updated and tell you that power is in that dungeon. Not exactly sure, but some of these are undiscovered and some of them you know the location of. Next up, we have a Skinwalker's Aspect. When you use a shape-shifting skill that changes your form, gain 54 life. If you are at full life, gain the same amount of Fortify. And this is unlocked by completing Fading Echo in Kazakhstan. Now also keep in mind that they're on the All tab when going through these powers, so we don't know which one of these are exactly class specific. We can obviously see if you're talking about shapeshifting or stuff like that, that's going to be Druid, but some of these are a bit more general but could still also be class specific. Then finally, the specific power they're going over in this is Aspect of Overwhelming Bolts. So charge bolts gain 2 extra projectiles, but its mana cost is increased by 5%. This is unlocked by completing Wretch Delve in Skazglen, and we know from the live stream that this is sorcerer specific. And like I mentioned, you can go check out that link in the description at Maxroll if you want to see a lot more of what you can expect from legendary powers or legendary aspects. But that's pretty much all I want to go over with the Codex of Power in Diablo 4. I think it is generally a pretty good system. Like I mentioned, it allows some pretty good deterministic gearing or power progression in the early and mid game, but then also allows for a lot more of grinding and upgrades past it once you get into the late game. And this is going to be a very heavily used system because of Diablo 4 being a seasonal game. So every new season, people are going to know what dungeons they want to go to get the legendary power they want for the build they're currently trying to create. So subscribe if you want to see more Diablo 4 or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about the Codex of Power, and thanks for watching.